Morning and welcome. You're watching First Break. My name is Amita Vadva. Let's get you the first international update we are tracking, where in a surprise move, Russian President Putin has declared Easter ceasefire in its long-standing invasion against Ukraine. The ceasefire is set to last for around 30 hours, starting 6 p.m. on Saturday, Moscow time, to midnight Sunday. Putin made that announcement after meeting with the Russian General Staff Chief and also cautioned the Russian forces regarding potential violations of ceasefire by Ukrainian forces during the 30-hour halt.
Руководствуясь гуманитарными соображениями, сегодня с 18:00 часов до 00 часов с воскресенья на понедельник российская сторона объявляет пасхальное перемирие. Приказываю на этот период остановить все боевые действия. Исходим из того, что украинская сторона последует нашему примеру. При этом наши войска должны быть готовы к отражению возможных нарушений перемирия и провокаций со стороны противника, любых его агрессивных действий.
However, with the statement that came in from the Russian president, Ukraine doesn't seem to be convinced. However, Russian President Putin announced for a temporary Easter ceasefire in Ukraine as far as the announcement came on the day. When it comes to Russia's defense ministry saying that its forces have pushed Ukrainian troops from one of the last remaining footholds in Russia's Kursk region, where Ukrainian troops staged a surprise incursion last year. According to the Kremlin, the ceasefire will last from 6 p.m. Moscow time, which is 3 p.m. GMT, on Saturday to midnight 9 p.m. GMT, and following Easter Sunday. Let's take a look and get you the update coming in from Rishabh's point as well. Rishabh, this seems to be a surprise announcement by President Putin in the light also of Easter Sunday, but Ukraine doesn't seem to be convinced with the statement.
But definitely, if we talk about Russia-Ukraine, what this is a big statement coming in from Russian President Vladimir Putin, where he has proposed an Easter, ceasefire. Remember, in last few days, the fight between both the sides have intensified, while there have been multiple, trials for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Just a day before yesterday, we heard Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State of United States, saying that if negotiation deals fail, the U.S. might even walk out of Russia-Ukraine conflict and Russia-Ukraine negotiations, in a way warning that the peace needs to come in. Now that Russian president has proposed this, Zelensky, with certain reservations, has also agreed to it. It would be interesting to see whether the ceasefire will remain in place after Easter as well or not.
All right. We also have Shinjoy getting connected with us right now. Shinjoy, good morning. Humanitarian example or something that already Ukraine seems to be raising certain doubts over the sudden Easter ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire that has been announced by President Putin?
Well, it's just one day. There have been similar ceasefires like this historically. During the First World War, there was a Christmas ceasefire. But the problem is that while a ceasefire is good for both sides, and not just the militaries but also civilians, will mean fewer attacks on civilians, on cities, and fewer casualties. It's only for one day. If that ceasefire could extend for a longer period, it would help both countries, the people of both countries, the soldiers of both countries. But one day will probably be less damaging, will probably be a breather, but everyone would wish it would be for longer.
Well, that's the point, Shinjoy, because as far as even when it comes to the pressure that the United States has also been exerting, President Putin's announcement is also coming at a time when President Trump said that negotiations between Ukraine and Russia are coming to a head, and insisted that neither side is playing him in his push, to ending the grinding 3-year war. So is there American pressure on them as well?
Well, America is talking about it. President Trump has said for a long time that this war would not have started if he were president. The war he had said as he was campaigning that he could end the war in a day. Yes, he has tried, He has definitely tried. He has made some suggestions. Some of those suggestions are not entirely acceptable to both sides. He had said that there should be a ceasefire immediately and just where the soldiers are, which basically means that Russia, which controls about 20% of Ukraine's territory, will hold on to that area. Now, that is not something that the Ukrainians want. Nevertheless, yes, the president Trump has tried. You're right. There is pressure on Russia from the United States. There are negotiations which are going on, but they are still far away from a permanent ceasefire. So what you get is a one-day ceasefire. 1 day, 24 hours. Now, while that will be a breather, everybody will probably think that it's not enough.
Well, even if it is 1 day, what exactly 1 day could hold? As far as this temporary Easter ceasefire, this truce that has been announced by President Putin. However, we'll also put out, Srinjoy continues to be with us, how the Ukrainian president has reacted. Zelensky, however, doesn't seem to be happy with Putin's Easter truce as he has announced, as far as Ukrainian president who lashed out at Putin and called the ceasefire as another attempt by Putin to play with human lives. Let's put that out for our viewers. This is a report where Zelensky says by the commander-in-chief, saying that we are documenting the actual situation on all directions, and the Kursk and the Belgorod regions, and the Easter statements by Putin did not extend to this territory. Hostilities, however, continue and Russian strikes persist. Russian artillery can still be heard in certain directions of the front, regardless of the Russian leader's promise of silence. And Russian drones are in use. In some areas, the situation has become quieter. Our actions are and will be symmetrical as the proposal for a full and unconditional 30-day silence remains on the table. The answer is that it must come from Moscow. Ukraine, together with the partners, is ready to move towards peace as constructively as possible, but the same readiness is also required from Russia. Zelensky says that I expect updated information from the front line as far as when it comes to what matters the most now is finally it is clear who has actually been the cause of this war all along. The moment Putin actually ordered a reduction in the intensity and brutality of attacks, fighting and killings have decreased, and the sole cause of this war and of its prolongation lies with Russia. So here is, Srinjoy getting a better understanding. Zelensky does not have that trust at all in Putin, saying that we don't want a 30-hour ceasefire, we are looking for a 30-day ceasefire with Russia.
Yes, and let's not forget that the war has gone on for 1,000 days plus. It's three years since the war actually started. You see the casualties that have happened on both sides. If you add up the two countries, over 100,000 people would have died in this fighting. 100,000 people. Now, to just put it in perspective, since 1947, 25,000 Indian soldiers have been killed in all the wars that India has fought, and includes terroristic activity. So from 1947 to today, India has lost 26,000 soldiers. Each life is very valuable, is precious. And here, the Russians and the Ukrainians together have lost 100,000 plus soldiers in this 3 years of fighting. And the number could actually be more. And it's not just soldiers. Civilians have also died in the fighting. So it's a huge tragedy, this war. And yes, a ceasefire of 30 hours, whether it's a complete ceasefire or a partial ceasefire, is a breather. But the ultimate goal, and India has been saying this all this while, that the 21st century is not a time for war. This is what Prime Minister Modi told President Putin in front of the cameras, that the 21st century is not a time for war. But regardless of all this, the war continues. There have been huge casualties. There's been a lot of damage to cities. And 24 hours is fine, 30 hours is fine, but it's just
But the mistrust still continues, because Zelensky has been saying that there is still a point in regions there where Russian artillery can still be heard. and they could not, have that trust in Russia, saying that what's the point of a 30-hour truce that has been called by Russia, means that it is Russia who's playing the game as far as when it comes to this war is concerned. Srinjoy, please to continue to be with us, because we're going to talk about a quick background as far as this Easter truce that has just come after United States President Donald Trump's pullback warning, saying that the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia are coming to a head, and also insisted that neither side is playing him in his push to end the grinding war. Well, coming back to Srinjoy on that, because we've been speaking of the United States and its role also here. When it comes to Donald Trump himself saying that if he was the president, Srinjoy, he wouldn't have allowed this war to happen in the first place. But a 30-day ceasefire deal that has been put on the table, Russia says it will only abide on its own conditions. No pressure from the U.S. will have any effect or result.
Yes, that's the issue. That 30-day ceasefire is being talked about for quite a few days. We've also had a lot of conversations about it, negotiations about it in Geneva, in Switzerland, and so on. But it hasn't gone through. The Russians believe there are issues there that they have to want for themselves. The Ukrainians have problems because that ceasefire means that the territory, a fifth of their country that the Russians currently control, just goes. Not to speak of the Crimea. The Crimea was taken by the Russians several years ago.
Right.
Now, as a result, Ukraine would lose a lot of territory, and that is not something that the Ukrainians are so happy with. They would want the Russians to vacate all territory. The Russians won't do it. So
right.
Even if you have a ceasefire, then it's just for a temporary one, a 30-hour one, a 24-hour one.
Right.
Fine. But what happens after that? The war begins. And even
so what
now,
happens after 30 hours? Because there is a lot of mistrust between both sides. However, announcing this 30-hour temporary truce, that announcement, and a surprise one that came in from the Russian president himself. Srinjoy, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining in. Back after a short break. You're watching Times Now.